Marcus Garvey learned early that true freedom begins with self-reliance and mental liberation, long before he became a global symbol of black pride and resistance. He understood one unshakable truth: chains on the body are powerless if the mind is free, and the opposite is even more dangerous. This belief would shape not only his philosophy, but an entire movement that shook empires and terrified those in power. Imagine growing up in a world where your worth is defined before you ever speak, where your future is decided by the color of your skin, and where history tells you that greatness belongs to others, never to you. Garvey refused to accept that story. He saw clearly that oppression survives not just through laws and weapons, but through ideas planted deep inside the human mind. If those ideas could be broken, everything else would follow. This is not just the story of a man. It is the story of a vision so bold, so unapologetic, that it united millions across continents. A vision that told people who had been taught to feel small that they were powerful. A vision that challenged economic dependence, cultural erasure, and psychological slavery. And because of that, it was a vision the system could not tolerate. What happens when one voice inspires millions to stand taller, think independently, and reclaim their identity? History shows us the answer. That voice becomes a target. In this video, we are going deep into how Marcus Garvey rose from humble beginnings to ignite one of the largest black movements in history, and why powerful forces worked relentlessly to silence him. His words still echo today, and his ideas remain as dangerous to injustice as they were a century ago. If you value stories that uncover hidden history, challenge official narratives, and inspire mental freedom, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Let us keep these stories alive, because truth only disappears when it is forgotten. Growing up in colonial Jamaica, Marcus Garvey did not learn about injustice from books alone. He lived it every day, quietly, persistently, and in ways that shaped how he understood the world long before he had the words to challenge it. The island was beautiful on the surface, filled with sunlight and ocean winds, yet beneath that calm exterior existed a rigid social order inherited from colonial rule. Power, wealth, and opportunity flowed in one direction, while the majority of black Jamaicans labored endlessly with little hope of advancement. As a child, Garvey observed this imbalance with an awareness far beyond his years, sensing that something was fundamentally wrong even if no one openly named it. Inside his home, there was a striking contrast to the world outside. His father, a skilled stonemason, surrounded himself with books and ideas, believing knowledge was the true measure of a man. Those shelves became Garvey's first classroom, offering glimpses into histories of conquest, leadership, and civilization that stood in stark contrast to how black people were treated in his own community. Outside those walls, black men were expected to work with their hands and remain silent, while authority was almost always white, distant, and unquestioned. The contradiction between what he read and what he witnessed planted a restless tension in his mind, one that would never leave him. That tension deepened when Garvey experienced racism not as an abstract concept, but as a personal wound. Childhood friendships dissolved the moment social boundaries were enforced, reminding him that acceptance could be withdrawn at any time. These moments did not harden him into bitterness. Instead, they sharpened his clarity. He began to see that inequality was not the result of individual failure, but of a system designed to limit ambition and reward obedience. The realization was subtle at first, but powerful. If a system could be built to suppress people, it could also be challenged by those who understood it. As he entered adolescence and moved beyond the familiarity of his hometown, Garvey encountered the economic machinery of colonial life more directly. Black labor sustained the island, yet black workers remained excluded from decision-making and ownership. Wages were low, conditions harsh, and advancement rare. Watching capable people struggle despite their effort convinced him that progress required more than patience or compliance. It required a fundamental shift in how people viewed themselves and their place in the world. This growing awareness connected seamlessly to the lesson he had learned early in life about self-reliance. Jamaica became the lens through which Garvey understood a much larger reality. What he saw on the island was not unique. It was part of a global pattern affecting people of African descent wherever colonial power reached. The same imbalance repeated itself in different forms, in different lands, under different flags. And if the problem was global, the response could not remain local. By the time Garvey began to find his voice through writing and organizing, his purpose had already taken shape. He was no longer driven only by personal ambition, but by a sense of responsibility born from what he had witnessed since childhood. Jamaica had taught him that dignity could be denied, opportunity restricted, unpaid, and history rewritten. But it had also taught him something else just as important. Awareness is the first step toward transformation. What began as observations in a small colonial town would grow into a determination to uplift black people everywhere. Not through anger or dependency, but through confidence, unity, and a renewed belief in their own worth. The lessons Marcus Garvey absorbed in Jamaica did not remain confined to the island. They traveled with him as he stepped beyond its shores, turning personal awareness into global understanding. When he left Jamaica, he carried more than ambition. He carried questions that could no longer be answered by local experience alone. What he discovered across Central America and Europe would confirm his deepest suspicions and expand his vision far beyond any single nation or colony. In Central America, Garvey encountered a world that felt both unfamiliar and disturbingly familiar at the same time. On the banana plantations of Costa Rica, black labor powered vast commercial empires, yet the workers themselves remained invisible, treated as replaceable tools rather than human beings. Long hours, harsh conditions, uncertain and fragile living arrangements defined daily life. While distant executives enjoyed comfort and security, Garvey observed how race and labor were intertwined in a system that extracted maximum effort while offering minimal dignity. It became clear that exploitation did not require chains to function. It thrived just as efficiently through contracts, wages, and silence. As he moved through Panama, the scale of that exploitation intensified. The construction of the Panama Canal stood as a symbol of progress to the outside world. Yet behind that symbol lay an unspoken cost paid largely by black workers. Many endured dangerous conditions, disease, and exhaustion to build an engineering marvel they would never fully benefit from. Watching this unfold, Garvey recognized a pattern repeating itself across borders. Black labor was essential, yet black lives were treated as expendable. The problem he had witnessed in Jamaica was not isolated at all. It was systemic and international. These experiences reshaped his thinking in profound ways. Garvey began to understand that oppression operated as a network rather than a single force. Different nations, languages, and economies participated in the same structure, benefiting from inequality while disguising it as development. This realization shifted his focus away from reforming individual systems and towards something more radical: unity across those systems. If exploitation was global, then liberation had to be global as well. Europe, particularly London, Diaspora, offered a different kind of education. There, Garvey encountered ideas, debates, and intellectual circles that placed the black experience within a broader historical and political framework. He engaged with writers and activists who spoke of Africa not as a forgotten continent, but as a foundation of civilization and identity. For the first time, Garvey saw black people discussing their future on a world stage, not as subjects seeking approval, but as thinkers shaping destiny. Exposure to Pan-African thought gave language to feelings he had carried for years without fully articulating them. London also revealed the contrast between the promise of imperial ideals and their reality. The empire spoke of progress and order, yet depended heavily on the same labor and resources it marginalized. Garvey saw how power maintained itself through narrative as much as force, convincing the world that inequality was natural or inevitable. This understanding sharpened his resolve. Liberation would require more than resistance. It would require a new story, one centered on pride, capability, and self-definition. By the time Garvey prepared to move on, his worldview had evolved from observation to strategy. He no longer saw black people as fragmented communities scattered by history, but as one people connected by shared experience and shared potential. His travels had transformed his awareness into purpose, reinforcing the belief that unity, economic independence, and mental freedom were inseparable. The world had shown him its contradictions, and in doing so, it had helped him shape a vision that would soon resonate across continents. By the time Marcus Garvey returned to Jamaica in 1914, he was no longer simply a young man shaped by experience. He was a man carrying a fully formed vision. The lessons of colonial Jamaica, the harsh realities of Central America, and the intellectual awakening of Europe had fused into a single, undeniable conclusion. Awareness without organization was powerless, and inspiration without structure would fade. If black people across the world were to rise, they needed more than ideas. They needed a movement. That realization gave birth to the Universal Negro Improvement Association. When Garvey founded the UNIA, it was not designed as a local group or a temporary campaign. From its very inception, it was global in ambition, built on the belief that people of African descent, regardless of where history had scattered them, shared a common destiny. Garvey understood that centuries of division had been one of the greatest obstacles to progress. The UNIA existed to reverse that fragmentation by creating a sense of shared purpose rooted in dignity and self-respect. What made the organization revolutionary was not only its message, but its tone. Garvey did not speak to black people as victims waiting for rescue. He spoke to them as builders, planners, and future leaders. Self-sufficiency was at the center of this vision, not as a slogan, but as a practical strategy. Garvey believed that economic independence was inseparable from freedom, and that no community could claim dignity while remaining dependent on systems that did not value its humanity. The UNIA encouraged education, entrepreneurship, and collective responsibility, offering people something they had long been denied: ownership of their own future. In its early days, the movement faced skepticism and resistance. Many dismissed it as too ambitious, too bold, or unrealistic. Resources were limited, and support in Jamaica was not immediate or overwhelming. Yet Garvey remained undeterred, guided by the conviction that ideas aligned with truth do not require universal approval to grow. He had seen enough of the world to know that transformation rarely begins with comfort. It begins with courage. The language of pride played a crucial role in the UNIA's expansion. Garvey challenged internalized narratives that equated worth with proximity to colonial standards. He urged people to see beauty, intelligence, and potential within themselves and their heritage. This was not about rejecting others, but about correcting a psychological imbalance that had been cultivated over generations. Pride, in Garvey's vision, was not arrogance. It was restoration. As the UNIA expanded beyond Jamaica, it became a bridge between scattered communities who had long believed their struggles were isolated. Meetings, publications, and symbols connected people in the Caribbean, the Americas, and Africa into a shared conversation about destiny. For the first time, many felt part of something larger than their immediate surroundings. The movement offered belonging, direction, and hope grounded in action rather than abstraction. What truly distinguished the UNIA was its insistence on self-definition. Garvey refused to allow others to dictate the limits of black aspiration. He believed that progress required not permission, but initiative. Through the UNIA, he provided a framework for people to imagine themselves not as subjects of history, but as its authors. The founding of the Universal Negro Improvement Association marked a turning point, not only in Garvey's life, but in the global black experience. It transformed individual awakening into collective momentum and turned a vision shaped by travel and observation into a living movement. What began in 1914 was more than an organization. It was the foundation of a new way of thinking, one that would soon echo far beyond the shores of Jamaica. When Marcus Garvey arrived in Harlem, the ideas that had been forming across Jamaica, Central America, and Europe finally found the stage they required. Harlem in the early 20th century was more than a neighborhood. It was a crossroads of ambition, frustration, creativity, and hope. Black communities from the American South and the Caribbean had converged there, carrying with them stories of struggle and the quiet expectation that something had to change. Into this charged atmosphere stepped Garvey, bringing with him a vision that was already global in scope and uncompromising in its message. At first glance, he was simply another voice among many. Harlem was alive with thinkers, artists, and organizers searching for answers to long-standing inequalities. Yet Garvey's words struck a different chord. He did not speak in cautious tones or limit his ambitions to small reforms. His speeches were expansive, rhythmic, and unapologetic. Tersama, filled with historical memory and future promise. He spoke of dignity not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived reality that could be reclaimed through unity and self-belief. People did not merely listen. They felt recognized. What made Garvey's presence so powerful was his ability to connect personal struggle to collective destiny. He addressed everyday frustrations while placing them within a global framework, reminding his audiences that they were part of something far larger than their immediate surroundings. Harlem's streets echoed with a message that challenged long-held assumptions about limitation and dependency. For many, it was the first time they had heard leadership speak directly to their potential rather than their pain. As his following grew, Harlem transformed into the nerve center of the UNIA. Meetings drew massive crowds, filling halls with men and women from all walks of life. Workers, business owners, artists, and intellectuals stood side by side, united by a shared sense of purpose. The movement created structure where there had once been only scattered effort. Through uniforms, parades, publications, and rituals, Garvey turned ideology into visibility, making pride something that could be seen as well as felt. The reach of his speeches extended far beyond the city itself. Reports, recordings, and word of mouth carried his ideas across borders, igniting conversations in the Caribbean, Africa, and Europe. Harlem became a broadcasting point for a global message, proving that black nationalism was not confined to one country or culture. Garvey's rhetoric emphasized common heritage and shared responsibility, dissolving the illusion that separation was destiny. His message resonated because it offered clarity in a time of confusion. Crucially, Garvey spoke with certainty in a world that had long denied it to his people. His confidence was not performative. It was rooted in conviction. He believed that mental liberation was the foundation of all progress, and he communicated that belief with unwavering intensity. Each speech reinforced the idea that transformation began with self-perception. In Harlem, that message found fertile ground among people ready to redefine themselves. As momentum built, Garvey's influence shifted from inspiration to mobilization. The movement encouraged action, discipline, and long-term thinking, urging followers to invest not only emotionally, but materially in their future. Harlem no longer functioned merely as a cultural hub. It became the command center of a worldwide awakening. The streets that once absorbed frustration now amplified ambition. By anchoring his movement in Harlem, Garvey turned black nationalism into a mass global force. What began as a vision shaped by travel and observation had become a living reality, visible in the confidence of the crowds that gathered to hear him speak. Harlem gave Garvey an audience, but more importantly, it gave millions a mirror in which they could finally see themselves reflected with pride, purpose, and possibility. As the movement gained momentum in Harlem and echoed across continents, Marcus Garvey understood that words alone could not sustain a revolution of the mind. Inspiration might awaken people, but institutions were what would anchor that awakening in everyday life. If self-reliance was to become more than a philosophy, it had to be practiced, lived, and reinforced through tangible systems owned and controlled by the people themselves. This belief marked the next phase of Garvey's work, one defined not by speeches, but by construction. The Black Star Line emerged as the boldest expression of that vision. To Garvey, ships were not merely vessels of commerce. They were symbols of movement, connection, and independence. Centered. For centuries, ships had represented forced displacement and exploitation for people of African descent. Garvey sought to reverse that meaning entirely. A black-owned shipping company, linking communities across the Atlantic, was meant to demonstrate economic capability on a global scale. It offered a concrete answer to those who doubted that black people could control major industries. Though the venture faced immense challenges, its significance lay in the idea it embodied: ownership changes psychology, and psychology shapes destiny. Alongside economic initiatives, Garvey recognized the power of narrative. Control of information had long been used to define, limit, and distort black identity. To counter that, he established the Negro World, a newspaper that functioned as both a news source and a unifying voice. Its pages carried stories of achievement, analysis of global events, and messages of encouragement that traveled far beyond Harlem. Readers in distant lands could see their experiences reflected and validated, often for the first time. The paper did more than inform. It connected scattered communities into a shared conversation about purpose and progress. Spiritual independence was another pillar of Garvey's vision. He understood that faith shaped how people viewed themselves and their place in the world. Many had been taught to associate holiness and authority with images that did not resemble them, subtly reinforcing feelings of inferiority. The creation of black-led churches offered an alternative space where dignity and identity aligned with belief. These institutions did not reject spirituality. They reclaimed it, allowing worship to become a source of affirmation rather than alienation. Faith, in Garvey's framework, was meant to strengthen resolve and unity, not diminish self-worth. Health and care were equally essential. Garvey saw clearly that dependence on systems that undervalued black lives created vulnerability. Healthcare groups like the Black Cross nurses emerged to meet practical needs within the community, offering support where it was often lacking. These efforts reinforced the idea that self-sufficiency extended beyond economics into well-being and mutual responsibility. By caring for one another, the movement demonstrated that independence was not isolation, but cooperation built on trust. What unified all these institutions was a single underlying principle: control over one's own life requires infrastructure. Garvey was not attempting to imitate existing systems. He was constructing alternatives rooted in collective effort. Each organization, whether commercial, cultural, or spiritual, served as a training ground for leadership and discipline. Participation itself became an education, teaching people how to manage resources, coordinate efforts, and think long-term. These institutions also made the movement visible in daily life. Pride was no longer confined to speeches or slogans. It appeared in uniforms, publications, businesses, and community services. The abstract idea of independence took on physical form, reinforcing belief through experience. People could see and touch what self-reliance looked like, and that visibility strengthened commitment. Through these efforts, Garvey transformed philosophy into practice. His institutions did not merely support his message, they embodied it. Together, they formed a living blueprint for economic, cultural, and spiritual independence, proving that liberation was not only something to be demanded, but something to be built, step by deliberate step. As Marcus Garvey's influence expanded beyond Harlem and crossed oceans, it also drew the attention of those who felt threatened by the scale of his vision, a movement that encouraged dignity, self-reliance, and global unity among Black people challenged existing power structures not through violence, but through confidence and organization. That confidence alone was enough to provoke resistance. Garvey was placed under intense scrutiny, his initiatives dissected, his character questioned, and his leadership framed as dangerous. Eventually, legal pressure closed in, leading to imprisonment and, later, deportation from the United States. For many movements, such a moment would have marked the end. For Garvey's, it became a turning point. Removal from the center of his work did not erase what he had already planted. Ideas, once released into the world, do not depend on the physical presence of their originator to survive. Garvey's philosophy had already taken root in millions of minds across Africa, the Caribbean, Europe, and the Americas. His speeches were repeated, his writings circulated, and his message passed from generation to generation. Even in absence, his influence continued to expand, shaped and reshaped by those who carried it forward. In later decades, figures like Malcolm X would openly acknowledge Garvey's impact, describing him as a pioneer who taught people to see themselves differently before demanding change from others. The emphasis on pride, historical awareness, Diaspora, and self-determination echoed clearly in later movements for civil rights and cultural empowerment. While strategies evolved and contexts changed, the foundation remained unmistakable. Garvey had shifted the conversation from seeking permission to claiming agency, from waiting for inclusion to building independent strength. What makes Garvey's legacy endure is not the perfection of his ventures, but the scale of his imagination. He dared people to think beyond limitations imposed by history and circumstance. He challenged the belief that power must always come from outside, insisting instead that it could be cultivated within communities through unity, discipline, and shared purpose. Even criticism and controversy could not erase the central truth of his message. Identity and confidence are forces that shape the future. Today, when discussions of empowerment, representation, and economic independence continue across the world, echoes of Garvey's voice can still be heard. His story serves as a reminder that progress often begins with ideas that seem too bold for their time, and that those ideas may outlive the struggles of the individuals who first articulated them. Silencing a person does not silence a vision once it has been embraced by many. As we reflect on this journey, from a young observer of injustice to a global symbol of self-belief, it becomes clear why Marcus Garvey remains impossible to erase from history. His life demonstrates that influence is not measured by how power responds to you, but by how deeply your message resonates after you are gone. Thank you for taking the time to listen and reflect on this story. If you found value in this journey through history and ideas, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel so we can continue exploring powerful stories together.